Hello, and thank you for having a listen to this week's episode of Security Insights with NDK Cyber. NDK Cyber is a cybersecurity recruitment company, first and foremost, recruiting on a global scale for software vendors, services providers, end user organizations, from entry level positions right through to leadership and all the weird and wonderful things in between. And we started a podcast to shine a light on certain areas in the security industry at the moment that we feel, are being heavily talked about, or perhaps those areas that aren't really being in the spotlight as much as they should do. So we've sat down this week with Rich Vibert from Metomic. He's the founder and the CEO. We talk through a number of topics around data security. So if you're into the whole data security posture management space, this is the one for you. Or if you wanted to, I guess, learn a bit more about it, we talk through everything from the state of play at the moment, the human elements involved, how organizations are changing, and of course, the buzzword at the minute of AI, how that's influencing the space. So I think there's an awful lot of information to be taken from this one. Very short episode, but I hope it gives you a good steer, and I think there's certainly room for a follow-up. So enjoy, and open to the feedback as always. Well, Rich, thank you for jumping on. Appreciate you're a busy guy. I would have just done you an introduction as part of the introduction to the podcast there. Likely butchered it. So are you okay just to give us a quick 30 seconds over who you are and what you're all about?
Yeah, sure. Well, look, nice to meet you, James. Good to be here. I'm Rich Vibert. I'm co-founder and CEO of Metomic. So Metomic is a UK-based cybersecurity company that's focused on data security for SaaS applications. So think about, your Slacks, your Jiras, your Zendesks, your Google Drives, and so on. We focus on protecting sensitive data inside these applications. And this is a modern take of what might be called DLP and this relatively emerging concepts of data security posture management, DLP, and a lot of these things are still, they're not rigorously defined in one central source. So this is what we're going to talk about today. What does this mean, right? So yeah, I've been building Atomic for the last 7 years, and yeah, we've got an exciting couple of years behind us, and certainly more excitement to come over the next couple of years, which we're going to talk about today.
Nice, cool. I spotted a few acronyms in the introduction there, and I'm sure there'll be many more coming up today. But and you're right. I think the whole purpose behind this is to sort of maybe shine a light on this space and not get to the bottom of it as such, but I guess have more open conversations around what this whole world is all around. And data security, certainly, and DLP and these things we mentioned there, that they're not new things necessarily. I know technology has changed over the years, but they're not new. So what's your take on the data security, the DLP, the DSPM
Yeah.
space at the moment? Like it seems to be getting more complex by the day.
Yeah, it doesn't, these a lot of these acronyms and terms have been around for a long time. And the first thing I'd say is for some the likes of it's interesting about the world that we're in. For some, the idea of DSPM is old and it's outdated to some, but some don't even haven't heard of it yet. So it shows that there's a big spectrum across the industry, across different types of industries in regard to how they're looking at cybersecurity generally and where this concept of data security sits on their roadmap, whether they've done it yet or they haven't done it yet. But when we look at the likes of data security, DSPM, DLP, what's the one thing in common, right? We're talking about data. And I think this is probably the one thing that we can all agree on in terms of what these things have in common. And it's generally shows the shift that we're seeing, which is a shift away from protecting more of the perimeters, so protecting our devices or protecting the network and protecting the data itself. And there's a very clear reason why that's happening. It's because the perimeter is evaporating to a lot of sensors, right? A lot of us are working from home, so we're not on a corporate network. A lot of us are working on our own devices, so we can't protect, company devices. A lot of us are doing our work across our own personal laptops and maybe even our own personal, phones. So the idea of a perimeter, it's been very hard to protect sensitive data when looking at the perimeter because it's not there anymore. So the trend that we're seeing across all these things is let's just find the data that we're trying to protect in the first place and protect it directly at that layer. So protect it at the layer of, there's a file that contains a lot of customer PII. Let's protect that file itself not the place where the file is being stored or the network in which the file is being stored in, so to speak. So I think generally all these things have this in common. The way that they're being phrased, DSPM, DLP, data security generally, they're still, I don't think me and you, James, are gonna come out and say, hey, well, this is what the terms are now. So there's different ways of thinking about it. There certainly are nuances that I think a lot of people would agree on between them, and we can talk about those again today. But generally, the conclusion to your answer is they all have data in common, and there's a good reason for that, which is there is no perimeter anymore, so you have to protect the data itself.
And one of the points you mentioned there, that some organizations look at this as a bit old hat, bit old school. Are they, I don't know how to phrase this, are they mistaken? Are they sort of, maybe thinking about things the wrong way, perhaps? Or
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about like, the super innovative like tech companies on the bleeding edge of technology that were born not just in the cloud, but
right, yeah.
they wouldn't know what it means to be not born in the cloud. They don't even know the concept of what not storing data in cloud environments means. For them, I'm not saying it's old, but for a lot of companies, they've been around for 5 to 10 years. And data security posture management's probably existed for them since their inception.
Mm.
And data security posture management, in their sense, is just knowing where your data it starts with knowing where your data is, right? Like, where's it being stored, classifying it. So what's being stored, where's it being stored, who has access to it, just an understanding of that. So for them, it might be considered more old just because it's existed since the day they existed. But for a lot of companies that are still doing the migration from on-premise to cloud, it's a new thing for them. So it's natural that there's this difference in terms of some companies considering this something that's existed forever, and some thinking this is data security being is a new thing, is a very modern thing.
Understood. Yeah, I see what you mean. Okay. And I guess just playing into that, the whole world now is moving towards this cloud and SaaS and IaaS and all that business. So that must create just complexities galore when it comes to who has access to what data and where it is. I mean, I think even if we think about our relatively small business here, we've got a lot in the cloud here that's
Yeah,
maybe we could be tighter on our data security
yeah,
as
yeah,
well. But yeah, it's I mean, take I don't know Salesforce for example.
yeah.
There must be so much data in there for these large organizations.
Yeah, and exactly right. And so, even when you sort of move on beyond like where's it being stored in terms of cloud or on your own hardware, you've got to think about the modern organization is using apps like Salesforce or like Slack or like Google Drive, and they aren't just a table of data. It's not just like rows of like this is the first name of the customer, this is the second name of the customer, or even unstructured data like JSON, right? That's relatively structured considering or compared to what we have today, like the Salesforce, which is unstructured to a new type of unstructured. Not only is it just like a complicated data set in general, an unstructured data set, but you've also got this new element of unstructuredness, which is not everyone has access to the same parts of Salesforce or to the same channels in Slack or to the same files in OneDrive. So it's not just about where data is being stored. There's all these new things that are in these new concepts from the mix, such as who has access.
Mm. And is that really compounded by having having data in SaaS applications as opposed to maybe the old school quote unquote solutions you had?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like SaaS is a whole new world of unstructuredness. Again, if we look take like one example, I mean, James, do you use Slack or do you use Teams or something like that?
We do, yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So like think about a lot of modern companies particularly, but I'd just say companies in general, they might be even doing customer service over Slack.
Mhm.
Like they've got apps, third-party apps that integrate with Slack. So maybe when you go to a website and you say, I'm trying to make this, maybe it's an e-commerce site, and you say, I'm trying to make this order, but I'm struggling to do this order for reasons X, Y, and Z. There's a good chance that e-commerce company has got a third-party application that's feeding your question into the likes of Slack or something, so that the customer service team can process or deal with that request in their favorite environments. And then that third-party application might push it back to the website or something. So you've got all these interconnected applications. Once that data is inside, well, there's two things here. One is the sprawl of data, the duplication of data is to a whole new level, and it's hard to understand where that duplication is happening. At first, it starts on the website, then it might go to the third-party application, then it's obviously in Slack. That's one thing, but then inside Slack, it's where are these channels? Who has access to these channels? Are they private channels? Are they semi-private channels? How many people are in these channels? How do I prevent a new person getting added to these channels? So there's a whole it's very tough to know where data is flowing in this weird and wonderful world of SaaS. But then there's a whole nother story of who has access. Um, and you can do that in statically, you might be able to do that. But to control who has access going forward becomes incredibly complex. As soon as someone gets added to your Slack environment, they might be added to every channel by default. So now they have access to it. So it's an
Yeah,
ongoing
wow.
process that makes it very difficult to understand where my data is, who has access to it, and then many other things, which we'll talk about, the classification, the data retention periods, and all these other things we have to think about as well.
Yeah, I'm just thinking out loud as well. Even that example you used there, if I'm having a problem with an e-commerce site, I might be then sharing sort of order reference numbers through to email addresses, card details, dare I say, things like that,
Yeah.
which opens things right up.
Yeah, it opens things right up, and again, it's not and this is why I think, like, and we'll probably come onto this a little bit, like more of them we're talking more about, because for example, data loss prevention, DLP, has been around for a very long time, but when I think more about the modern one, you've got to think about that this example that we're using here. It's not necessarily wrong that your credit card details end up in these other environments. It's just a natural course of doing business, right? There's a good reason why the company might be processing your credit card in the way that it's processing it. Give or take, that's obviously a highly sensitive piece of data, so maybe it's a wrong example, but maybe your name or something.
Mhm.
Um, so it's not just a case of like preventing. This is the other thing that's new about data security. It's not just preventing. It's not just alert something happened with sensitive data, do this thing. If you do that, you're either A, going to shut down the organization because you're going to prevent anyone doing what they need to be
Mhm.
doing, or B, you're going to end up with a ton of alerts to the security team to the extent that the security team can't deal with those number of alerts. You've also got to take into account things like how long should that data be there? Should it be there in the first place? How long should it be there? Who should have access to it? And encompassing some of these more broad but new concepts like data minimization, right? You need to make sure that you're not storing, processing data, um, in ways that's not needed for you to do the job that's at hand. So again, more questions, more nuances that make it extremely tough to get this right.
Crikey, I feel like we're just sort of just nudging the lid off this at the moment. There's a thousand rabbit holes we could go down here.
Yeah.
So there's concepts to sort of get your head around there, but equally, I can't help thinking, okay, we've gone on-prem to SaaS. That's sort of one sort of hurdle that's thrown in a whole load of new challenges. But then you layer on top of that AI,
Yeah.
and that must just be the accelerator to to go to the next level of challenges, no?
Exactly. Yeah. Like obviously, we think about AI in the modern sense, which we could call LLMs, right? Not in the modern sense, but in the very, in the very modern sense, we talk about things like LLMs. Um, you're completely right. It's taken it. It's like it's added this whole new dimension of complexity on top of it. But the good thing, I think the good thing, I would consider the good thing is it still ends up boiling down to the same thing, which is, oh, we need to have an understanding of the data. There's nothing else that can be, there's things that can be done. There are things that can be done in terms of, making sure you're using the right tools and checking the security of the, but again, all of these developments that we're seeing in the world of technology are continuing to um, basically conclude that we need to understand where the data is. That's just continually the direction that security teams are going in regards, especially when it comes to SaaS and AI and so on. So yeah, these new tooling, they're introducing new third parties. So again, it's more places where data is flowing, where data is being stored. It's obviously encouraging employees to put data in new places, question marks over whether they should be in those places in the first place. So again, it's like a constant, just evolving space that's making it incredibly challenging to solve this problem. But the more people are thinking about it, the more they're realizing the best thing we can do is understand the data and secure the data itself.
I'm with you, okay. And it's just you hear these horror stories of ex-employee whacks their name into Copilot and then
Yeah,
finds their name on a to be made redundant next quarter list or something like that. That these things come
exactly.
up and the risks are just. it's not even from your outside adversaries, it's internal, and the internal threat is there as well, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, we talk about, I think, obviously this is a very talked about thing in security right now, but there's a lot of different flavors to the byproducts and the risky byproducts of AI when it comes to protecting sensitive data. Yeah, that's a great example, which is if you look at some of these LLM tools, if you hook them into any part of your system, in some ways it can quite easily then realize that it has access to your entire system, maybe because of a misconfiguration, or maybe that's just the way things are that it wasn't known. So that's one example, like employees now have access to figure out who's on the list of people that might be let go, right, in the future. But then there's other risks as well, which is employees. I mean, I'm not afraid to admit it. I don't think anyone is. These tools can make it incredibly easy to do our jobs. So I'm admitting that I use these tools to make it easier to do my job. But for a lot of people, it's hard to then, or they don't know, it's probably non-malicious copying an email into ChatGPT and asking for a way to reply to it. That original email you copied might contain sensitive data. Now you've given it to another application, you've given it to another company. Not only is that a very straight breach of probably multiple regulations, but it's another sensitive data risk, which is now if ChatGPT were to have a security incident or get breached, the company that gave the data to ChatGPT is responsible for that breach because they're the owner of the data in the first place. They're the one who holds the customer relationship. So there's all these flavors of how AI is changing the way that security teams need to look at sensitive data and the new risks that are emerging because of it.
Yeah, crikey. The ChatGPT feeding email thing is a core example. I think that I think maybe a lot of people out there are guilty of. And then the whole DeepSeek stuff of late, adds an additional sort of twist to that for the
Right, exactly. And a lot of the tool, again, it depends on the type of tool you're using, and I don't know, so I can't speak on behalf of all of them the way they work. But I know, for example, that there are some of these tools that you can have sort of more of a, let's say, private installation of these tools where they're not going to train their data sets off what you give them. But then some of the free and maybe more new tools that are emerging, they can't hold that promise right now. So whatever you give them, they might be feeding that into their models to train their models, which are then used by other companies. So it's perfectly reasonable to say there's a world where you feed them a load of data in terms of what your organization's doing that might include a load of sensitive data. Your direct competitor that might be using the same tool might essentially have access to that same data set now in some ways, right? Because the model's been trained on your competitor's data set as well. So again, this is one example that's emerging very quickly and it's evolving very quickly. So it's getting better, it's getting a bit tighter in terms of you can have private installations and so on. But these risks are very real right now.
crikey. Yeah, that would open things up for sure. And I guess even just speaking today on this call here, it sounds like maybe DLP many moons ago would traditionally be that was a problem for the security team or the CISO.
Yeah.
But it seems now we're sort of transcending that, and it's the CISO is absolutely in the conversation still, but we're looking at the person that maybe holds the keys to the technology and the data stack as well.
Mhm.
So it's a conversation for everybody, not just the security group.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we've talked about the transition, how companies and security teams, but companies even more broadly are thinking about protecting the data. That's sort of the line of thinking that's happening now because the perimeter's dissolving and so on. But there's another very interesting development and evolution that's happening, which is it's not just about protecting the data, it's about protecting the employees. And when I mean protecting, I don't just mean education. I don't just mean, here you join the company today. Please read the security policy and sign it. I don't mean evolving that. So we do need to evolve that sort of thing. But I mean, giving the whole organization the ability to protect to their own data in real time. So when an employee goes to ChatGPT and tries to enter something that might contain sensitive data, although they didn't know it in the first place, or when they create a file in Google Drive and they make that file public rather than private, how do you enable the employees in real time to be informed and have controls over these own risks? We call this the human firewall, and it's a very real development that's happening right now. we see a lot of organizations turning to the employees,
Okay.
um, turning to the employees to have a handle on the own risks that they're creating, because it's not binary. It's not like that's bad, that's good. It's a very complicated spectrum of this is risky, but it needs to be done all the way through to that shouldn't be done at all. So it's about enabling, giving these employees notifications in real time when they do something that might be risky, and then giving them controls to protect their own risks, right? So, hey, James, you just created a file, it contains a lot of sensitive data. You made that file public to the internet. Did it need to be public? And there and then in the application or in something like Slack or Microsoft Teams, you can say, oh no, I meant to share it directly with Rich. And so the tool will then change the sharing permissions of that file you created. It all comes down to this idea of minimizing the risk. It's not about purely prevention. It's about minimizing the risk that's out there, because there will always be risks. It's about minimizing the unnecessary risks without getting in the way of productivity.
Understood. Okay. And so on that theme, then, if I'm worried that I'm whoever as part of X enterprise, I'm
Yeah,
concerned that we are, not having the best data security practices or best practices around our data, full stop. What are the conversations I need to be having with my local team, with my leadership, with myself around how do we identify that and then de-risk it maybe?
100%. So like 100% in the sense that it's a question, it's a very real question that's happening right now. It all starts with what we started our conversation with, which is an understanding of where data is, who has access to it, when was it created, just to have like that is a massive leap forward for a lot of organizations, and a very commendable one as well. Like it's to have that real time understanding of where data is, who has access. um, it's a huge step up in terms of understanding where your risks are and being able to protect risks, before protect risks before they become real risks. You know what I mean? So that's always the first thing. Is it always starts with let's look what's out there, and that might be connecting, like for example, with a lot of our customers. It's integrating with their SaaS environments and saying, here's where all the sensitive data is. So what do you mean Metomic by that? Okay, Metomic, show me where all PII data is. Okay, here's all the instances of PII across your entire SaaS stack. Okay, show me all the instances of PII that are accessible by the engineering team. Okay, here's all the instances of PII, all the Slack messages, all the Google Drive files, all the Zendesk tickets that the engineering team can access if they wanted to. It's about that's the first thing. The second thing is clearing up those risks. So finding unnecessary risks. And the biggest thing that we see, in this step is what you could call redundant data. So data that, a file that was created 5 years ago in Google Drive.
Right.
It
Okay.
contains customer PII that aren't even customers anymore. So, and that file is public or that file is accessible to the engineering team. Let's delete that file or close down the sharing permissions to make it private and so on. So there's this real big retrospective cleanup, which honestly solves a huge chunk of the problem. The problem will emerge again if you don't continue to solve it, but in terms of that moment, it solves a huge chunk of the problem. The final step is um, putting policies in place that prevent these risks appearing again in the future. So creating real-time policies that do things like if someone creates a file that contains PII that's accessible to the engineering team, send that person a notification to say you just created a file, it looks risky, did you mean to do that? Or even just shutting down the sharing permissions. Don't let these files be accessible to the engineering team. So those are the three steps that we see. It's not an overnight exercise, all three together. Certainly the first thing, the big understanding of where data is and doing that clear up exercise, that can be done overnight and it's a huge value add immediately.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's you've summarized it very concisely there as a sort of here's your three-step process. But obviously, as you say, it's nowhere
Yeah.
near as as fluid as that. But it also sort of strikes me as like it's a culture thing as much as a technology problem to fix.
There's certainly a cultural element to it, especially that final piece, right? So they're putting I think that there's a big technology element to it, which is like understanding where your data is, and this probably feeds more into the DSPM world, the data security posture management, which is typically just like a picture of things. That is it's mostly a technology thing. It's a very complicated technical problem, especially when you're looking across multiple cloud and SaaS environments all at one time, and trying to know that that phone number inside Zendesk belongs to the same person, that email address in Salesforce's. That's a big technology problem. I think I think when we look at like the number, to automating policies to prevent these risks appearing again in the future, and to sort of contain that risk as you go about moving forward and building your organization and so on. That can be a cultural piece. You can use more traditional DLP things like prevention, so preventing people doing stuff. There's a cultural element to that, but it's in terms of understanding why I can't create this file or why I can't share this message. I think the bigger cultural thing that we're starting to see, and that I think the whole world will start to see over the next, 1 to 10 years, is the giving employees controls to prevent or to contain their own risks. The notifications to say, you just created this file, it looks kind of risky. What do you want to do about it? That's going to be a big cultural piece. And then it goes way beyond that, rewarding the employees that are good at preventing their own risks or containing their own risks or and maybe how do you deal with employees that aren't getting better during the process? That's going to be a cultural piece that hasn't been solved yet, and it's going to be very exciting to see how that does progress over again the next 1 to 10 years.
Yeah, I hadn't even sort of I guess considered that whole cultural almost the old school sort of security awareness and training piece. That goes way beyond like that point you mentioned earlier about reading the security policy and signing it.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
it's that, leveled up seriously, isn't it, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rich, we've dived, well, I say dived into, but we probably more touched on many different areas of this for this relatively short form series here. So I think there's probably a good one or two follow-up episodes to follow.
Yeah.
But you mentioned it earlier. You've had a good run so far with you guys. What's sort of what's on the horizon? What are you excited about moving forward?
So generally, I'm generally super excited about this space and excited from a sense that I think the risks are getting more. Um, yeah, I think it's the risks are obviously getting, especially with this rise of AI, the risks are getting more. There's more flavors of risk. They're getting more threatening, and so I'm super excited by the fact that Metomic and other companies have got very innovative technologies that are helping companies contain and solve and address these problems. Um, so I'm just excited. I'm excited by that. I'm excited in terms of looking forward. I'm incredibly excited about the conversations that we're having and that we're seeing in regard to this human firewall piece, in terms of allowing employees to protect their own data, to have a handle on their own sensitive data, contain their own risks, and so on. I think that's going to be an incredibly fascinating piece. And generally, like it's when we go back straight to the start of our conversation, when we haven't really talked too much about this. Maybe it's another one for another episode. We started this conversation by looking at the data, right? We said that the evolution is let's protect the data, not the perimeter. We haven't talked about the complexity of just doing that. It's not easy to find a national insurance number. It's not easy to identify that national insurance number belongs to the same person that email address belongs to. So there's still a huge amount of technology innovation that we're doing and many other companies are doing in just that point, just finding the sensitive data, but understanding where that is. There's still a huge amount of innovation that's going to go into that. It's way more, as I think everyone listening today and yourself, James, will know, it is way more than just like, oh, there's 16 digits, therefore it's a credit card number. We have moved way beyond that. It's very contextual now in understanding what might be considered sensitive data. It's looking at what file is that credit card number in? Who owns that file? When did they create it? What other data points are in that file? So the innovation really now is happening regarding like the metadata and the context around the data. So anyway, I go off on a tangent a bit because
Yeah.
that foundation of this whole world of DSPM, DLP, data security, there's still a huge amount of innovation going on there. Whilst at the same time, the policy layer, the edge layer of how we protect data going forward, that's also innovating very quickly as well. So across the board, it's just everything's moving very fast in very interesting ways. And um, I think we've got a very clear picture on how it's going, but there's still some question marks, and that excites me too.
No, that's awesome to hear, and I think, like you say, there's so much innovation going on globally with all these different companies, and I think the more light we can shine on the space, and hopefully doing things like this will
Yeah.
just encourage people to have those conversations along this line. So no, I'm excited about what's to come too. So Rich, thank you for joining today. Appreciate you sharing all that. I think, like we said, there's probably a follow up or two due here, but for now, let's call it, and I'll speak to you soon.
All right. Cheers, James.
Thanks, Rich. Take care.